Well, the temperatures are dropping, the days are getting shorter, and the leaves have all fallen from their trees, leaving us with an abundance of these weird bone hand trees. In addition to the year 2020 being what it ended up being, chances are you're finding yourself staying indoors a lot more, doing whatever you can to keep warm and distract yourself from the world. And if you're anything like me, you're one of the unfortunate souls trapped working retail during the holidays, during one of the worst pandemics we've ever seen in our lives. But when you're not doing that, again, if you're anything like me, you're more than likely retreating into your video game collection. For me, there's a lot of games that I can't help but closely associate with the colder months. Yeah, okay, I realize this might be a bit tricky for me to properly articulate, but have you ever listened to a really good album during a particular season of the year and it just kinda hits different? So well, in fact, that when that season rolls around again, it just makes you want to listen to it again on repeat? Well, I get that way with a lot of video games. Either because I got them as holiday gifts, or because I first played them during the fall or winter. I'm sure there's a word for that kind of feeling somewhere. Seasonal nostalgia, maybe? I don't know. But these are just a handful of games that I closely associate with playing indoors on a chilly night. Truth be told, a lot of the games I'm about to show you here are ones that I'm tempted to do full videos on, so I'm gonna not go into too much detail on them here. I don't know when I'm gonna do them, just eventually. And with that, here are my cold weather games. When it comes to Microsoft-published franchises, the ones you hear about the most are undoubtedly Halo and Gears of War, pretty much at the expense of everything else they've published. I mean, good luck finding anyone who remembers stuff like Sudeki or Brute Force. But for my money, I'll take the one franchise that actually had some momentum going for a while, and that was the Fable series. The moral choice-driven action RPG developed by Lionshead. The first one I ever played was actually the 2005 enhanced re-release of the first game called Fable: The Lost Chapters. Though the footage you're seeing here is from the Fable Anniversary remake, it does contain the Lost Chapters content in it, so hey, it counts. I don't recall exactly which year it was I started playing this, but I do remember it was in the late fall, early winter portion of that year. I distinctly recall the first time I ever played it, I ended up playing it for a good 5 hours straight. Yeah, it hooked me. I even remember getting up early one cold Sunday morning to play it. And that was a memory that really stuck with me when it comes to the first game. I dumped hours upon hours into the first game alone, all the way up to the point where there were no benevolent hero-related quests left in the game. As for the other two, I remember getting Fable 2 with Christmas money in 2008, and Fable 3 on an old PC back in the winter of, 2011, I think. So yeah, I unintentionally ended up playing all of the Fable games during the winter, so it just ended up becoming a winter series for me. But I find them to be very comfy games to play during those cold months. Oh, and I am so happy that they're finally making a new one. It took them long enough. And since we're on the topic of forgotten Xbox exclusives, another one I'd like to shine a light on is Voodoo Vince for the original Xbox. Though it's not quite as forgotten as some of their other games, as it did get an HD remaster in 2017 for Xbox One and PC. In fact, if you couldn't tell, you're looking right at it. It was just easier for me to get remaster footage than it is to snag an original Xbox copy, which I'm grateful for because this game deserves to have been remastered. Voodoo Vince is a 3D platformer released during a time when the popularity of the 3D platformer was trending downward. In fact, considering the types of games Microsoft would go on to be known for, it's kind of surprising that they even bothered venturing into this genre to begin with. But anyway, I rented this game during my holiday break from school in 2003. It was actually the same day I rented the Futurama game of all things too. But yeah, having rented it for a week from Blockbuster Video in December 2003, many of my days and nights leading up to Christmas were spent with this game. Its unique level design, the cool color palette, and the amazing soundtrack all take me right back to that week in December 2003 when I first played it. I might even start making it a habit to play it every winter. My nostalgia for it is that strongly tied to the colder months. Everyone and their grandmother has made some kind of video about Banjo-Kazooie. And rightfully so, it's an excellent game, one of the best on the N64. But when the wintertime rolls around, the game that I get the urge to put at least a little bit of time in is its 2000 sequel, Banjo-Tooie. Just pretend you're looking at original N64 footage here instead of the XBLA version, and you get the idea. I remember buying this game a day or two after Christmas with the money I'd been given from relatives, and proceeded to spend a very large portion of my holiday break playing it. In fact, even after my break, most of my nights during the preceding weeks were dedicated to playing it and trying to find every secret the game had. And it's a good thing I had a holiday break off from school, because even trying to make basic progress in Banjo-Tooie is a big time investment. Not only are the levels utterly massive, they're all interconnected with each other and involve a pretty large amount of backtracking. The game kind of just tosses you into it and tells you to figure it all out for yourself, and it can feel just a little overwhelming at times. Though I suppose the argument could be made that the added element of exploration and discovery is what adds to it. And this is coming from somebody who's 100% completed both Banjo-Kazooie and DK64. That being said, I never actually finished Banjo-Tooie, but I still dig it and hope to actually finish it someday. Now, this next one will be a bit of a doubleheader because many of these games were released the same year, but the Jak games and the PS2 Ratchet and Clank games are both on this list because I received these games as Christmas presents the years they were released. Despite owning the HD collections of both of these series, I also still happen to own my original PS2 copies. I still remember the Christmas mornings I spent playing these games quite vividly. Actually, funny story, the year Jak 2 and Ratchet and Clank 2 came out, on Christmas morning in fact, I got the flu. And the PS2 was in my brother's room at the time, and I think I accidentally got him sick. But luckily, that's not my only memory of these games. Having received them as Christmas presents and becoming some of my favorite games on the PS2, I can't help but think of them when the holiday season rolls around. I did also receive Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time as a Christmas present, but I didn't play it until years afterwards for some reason, so that's why that's not on here. And while it stinks that the Jak series is pretty much dead at this point, it does make me happy to see Insomniac still making Ratchet & Clank games, even if they aren't anywhere near as funny or cynical as the PS2 games. Castlevania Circle of the Moon was the first game in the series I ever bought. I want to say it was in late 2002 because Harmony of Dissonance had just come out. For me, I remember getting it on a Sunday evening out of town and coming home with it after the sun had gone down and playing it on my non-backlit original model Game Boy Advance. I also remember dying like 3 or 4 times before hitting the first save point. Yeah, I kinda sucked at this game when I first played it. So much so that it took me a good year or so before I finally beat the game. Despite the controls being a bit stiff and the game itself being kinda hard in some places, this was the game that made me a Castlevania fan, or at the very least a Metroidvania fan. I still think visually the game holds up pretty well for being almost 20 years old, and it has one of my personal favorite soundtracks of any game on the GBA. Easily the best soundtrack out of the 3 Castlevania games on the system, which is saying something because they're all fantastic. Frankly, this and any of the DS Castlevanias could have made the list, as I first played those right as the year was winding down, but I decided to go with Circle of the Moon because this was the first one I played, and it kinda has some sentimental value. If you know me, you know that I'm a very big Kingdom Hearts fan. I mean, Kingdom Hearts 3 was my game of the year in 2019. The only ones I haven't played are Recoded on the DS because I just never got around to it, and the cell phone game and the newly released Melody of Memory because I'm not interested in them. The very first game, which I still think is a rock-solid game in its own right, I first played at a friend's house on Halloween of all nights, and immediately I was hooked. So just a few months later in December or January, I got my own copy and spent many chilling nights with it. Heck, even when I started my second playthrough, it was on a night when I got like 7 or 8 inches of snow. I would go on to play this game on other parts of the year too, but the memories of playing it in winter are the ones that stick out in my mind the most when it comes to this first game. And for the last game on this list, we're headed back to the PS1. The only turn-based JRPG on this list, The Legend of Dragoon. I got this as a Christmas present about a year after it came out. Same year Jak and Daxter came out, as a matter of fact. Ah, man, that was a good winter break. Anyway, I'm not going to go too heavy into detail with this game, as I do eventually want to give this game its own separate video, but what really separates this game from its contemporaries was the combat system, using a sort of quick-time event to keep players engaged, rather than merely selecting from a menu. I know QTEs are cliché, overused, and even a little bit dreadful to mention nowadays, but back then, this was seen as unique, and it really helped it stand out amongst other JRPGs. The magic attacks being relegated to one-time use items and the Dragoon transformations only helps differentiate this game from, say, Final Fantasy. For its time, The Legend of Dragoon had a surprisingly large budget, and in my opinion was a real standout in the JRPG boom of the PS1 era. Not to mention, it had the best pause menu music of any game ever. It's a real shame that Sony doesn't make this kind of game anymore. I guess the Western-made award bait games are where their real profits lie nowadays. And apparently the game only has a 74% on Metacritic, which I completely disagree with. Okay, I went on enough of a tangent with this. The Legend of Dragoon, if you're a JRPG fan, clear your schedule and go ahead and play it if you haven't already. Frankly, these aren't even all of the games I had in mind for this list. For the sake of not having this video go on forever, I cut a bunch of choices out, so there's a very good chance I'm going to revisit this topic someday. And like I've stated earlier, many of these games are ones I would love to do dedicated videos on at some point. There's only so many times I could say that I played this game during such and such month, that's why I associate it with the fall or winter. But I hope I got my point across as well as I hope I did. I really don't even know if this video is going to make sense to a lot of people, but it's a topic I've had banging around in my head for quite some time now. But what about you? Do you have any games that you play during the colder months, or ones that you closely associate with the seasons for whatever reason? Let me know in the comments, because I would genuinely like to know yours. I've got more content in the works, so if you like what you see, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, happy holidays, and I'll see you next time.